Good day to you, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Fred Pattison. I'm the Climate Change Finance Readiness Advisor at the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment Program, and I will be going through the session on basic knowledge of vulnerability assessment of ecosystems. And the focus will be on the ecosystem and socioeconomic resilience analysis and mapping, and in short, I will use the word ESRAM throughout this training. I will first of all touch on what is adaptation to ecosystem-based adaptation to climate change, or EBA, and then what is ESRAM and the objectives. We'll touch on the major steps in the ESRAM process, and we'll go through a case study to demonstrate to you the kind of studies or assessment has been done. EBA is defined by the CBD Ad Hoc Technical Working Group on Biodiversity to Climate Change as the use of biodiversity and ecosystem services as part of the overall adaptation strategy to help people adapt to the adverse effects of climate change. And I'm sure that you have already gone through a similar definition, so I will not elaborate on that. This slide is to demonstrate to you an example, and you can see there a village that has this natural ecosystem intact, has it more protected for adverse weather events or the impacts of climate change, so to speak. And also, if you do not manage your ecosystems well, as you can see there, the community become highly vulnerable. So what is ESRAM? ESRAM is basically a tool, an assessment tool or methodology that allows you to understand an overview of ecosystem and services and their vulnerability to the impacts of climate change. And the purpose of this course, as I said from the beginning, is for you to understand this as a tool for assessing ecosystems. In any typical EBA project, and in this case for this training, there is a four-step process. One is the ESRAM, which allows you to do your baseline studies and identify the options. And 2 is implementation, and 4 is integration. For the purpose of this training, our focus is on step 1 and 2, but I will focus on step 1 for today. There are 6 objectives, and these 6 objectives are aligned to the major phases or steps in the ESRAM process. 1 is on ecosystem types. You study the ecosystem types. 2 is to map the ecosystems. 3 is to understand the current state and the root cause of the different impacts. And 4 is to undertake the socioeconomic valuation. 5 is on assessing the ecosystem and services. And 6 on the broad recommendations for implementation, which we will not cover. These major steps in the ESRAM process are as follows. 1 is your ecosystem baseline and threat assessment. In this process, we look at the state of the ecosystems, we identify them, we look how the community value these services provided, and we map out these ecosystem services and the ecosystems. Step 1 is a process in itself. Step 2, we identify all these ecosystems and we undertake an economic valuation, and I will touch on that later in detail. And step 3 is to understand the condition and the threats from the impacts of climate change and other sources of impacts, and often referred to as non-climate change impacts or human activities or even other threats from development. Once you completed your ESRAMs, you will go through a process of EBA options identification, and that I will cover in the next sessions. The slide we're looking at gives you a summary of the ESRAM process, and I think once we go through the case study, you will understand it a bit more. But this 4-step process outlines the different steps or components of an ESRAM. So your baseline is in step 1, your economic valuation is in step 2, your assessment of the impacts of climate change on this ecosystem is in step 3, And step 4 is your options development or analysis. I will go through the case study of Wagina Island in Choiseul, which SPREP has a project there, to demonstrate to you the the value of doing an ESRAM study. And this island is located on Choiseul province, has a population of about 3,000 people, and it is the people that are heavily dependent on the natural ecosystem, especially the marine environment, but also resources on the island. So the first step we took, and I've gone through that with you as well, is to understand the ecosystem baseline and the threats. And usually we work with, we organize meetings and workshops, you do field works to identify these different ecosystems and to validate them. And this involves field work, traveling to the community, and then we take those data and apply them on the map. And this is something that will need a bit of, you will need the GIS specialist to help with you to do this kind of work. That process is a comprehensive process in itself. So on this map you're looking at, is the distribution of key ecosystems on the island of Wagina. And as you can see, there are the different ecosystems like the marine lagoon, the reefs, cultivated land. Those red dots you can see is the community, human settlements. Everything that is within the ecosystems around Wagina are mapped. And then this map is based on a summary. We identify this natural ecosystem and say what services do they come from. Food, for example, water, building materials, transport services, waste disposal services, medicine, for example, recreation. All these different uses of services comes from these natural ecosystems. By doing that, you are able to identify the key areas of direct community utilization on the land and on the sea. And this is what we have done in this case. And as you can see, you will be able to show on the map where the fishing grounds are, where they're getting their food sources from, the levers, and where they cut their timbers from, for example, is also shown. Where they're getting hunting or terrestrial food, all that is mapped, and that this whole process is done in collaboration with the community and then transferred onto a spatial map. Step 4 is to look at these ecosystems services and say what is their value. And I've touched on ecosystem valuation, and this is to give monetary value to some of the services that people use. For example, firewood has monetary value. Fish you fish has monetary value. Seaweed, for example, is a major source of income for the people of Wagina, and it comes from the natural ecosystems, from the reefs and from the lagoons. Understanding this allows the community to appreciate and give value to the natural environment as well. So this is an important step for the community and also for the process itself. The third step, and also most important and to our discussion, is how does climate change affect those natural ecosystems and the services they provide. And we looked at different climatic impacts. And in this case, we've looked at the drought, sea level rise, ocean acidification, extreme weather events, sea and air temperature, and extreme rainfall. All these variables are having continuous impact on the natural systems that people We utilize some of the climate analysis data in the region for the Solomons. It's quite difficult to get localized data, but I'm sure as technology increases, we'll be able to do that. But for the Solomons, we have a number of climate threats with projections for 2030 and 2090, and then we apply that to the ecosystems. And the classical vulnerability assessment methodology is applied in this case, looking at exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity to determine the level of vulnerability. This process is done once you understand, you get your information from your baseline. So we looked at the, as an example in this table, you can see for mangroves, the coastal protection will be affected by sea level rise. Groundwater, for again, is very important. It's affected by saltwater intrusion for the next 10 years, and also projections within the next 2019. This is an important piece of information because it will help you make informed decisions when you develop your EBA options. And this map gives you a summary of the kind of data that is produced. Also very important and taken into consideration is the other threats that are not climate in nature. For example, infrastructure development, or mining development, or human activities such as removal of forest. These are also threats to the natural ecosystems, and those threats have to be taken into consideration. And as you look at if you look at the word ESRA, it talks about socioeconomic resilience, and socioeconomic resilience takes into consideration the other non-climate factors in this assessment methodology or process. This slide provides you a summary of what I've just said. You look at the raw materials, food or biodiversity or coastal protection comes from different ecosystems, and those ecosystems are impacted by different climatic factors. And for Wagina, based on our assessment, the major threats are coming from sea level rise, extreme weather events, increasing temperature, and also ocean acidification. And it is affecting, especially the number one priority is coastal and freshwater, groundwater, and the reefs and the marine lagoons. So this basically gives you an overview of the assessment methodology and, that I have explained. And step 4 is to develop your options. Now, what EBA options will you consider once you've done your ESRA? And this is a process in itself, and I will touch that in the next presentation, in my next session. But for now, let me just give you an example of what some of those options are. So let's take into example, for example, for Wagina, provision of drinking water and for domestic use and for drinking. It comes from ground wells and surface water springs, and because the people are dependent on the wells and also the surface water, the impact of climate change comes from sea level rise, saltwater intrusion, salination. Prolonged dry periods also affect their livelihood, but also extreme weather, rainfall causing sedimentation. But also there is the threat from human activities, pollution, poor sanitation practices, and you will note that the impacts from non-climate change related causes are also significant to the well-being and the resilience of our communities. I will touch base more on this in my next presentation. I thank you very much for listening. I hope you understand the process that I've tried to describe, and enjoy your day. Thank you.